The Rocky Mountains don't move. They've stood there for 60 million years, watching everything beneath them come and go. Empires. Storms. Men who thought they were permanent. This morning they're watching a parking lot. Halcyon Aerospace, Boulder, Colorado. A campus of glass and steel and $22 million of the most advanced military helicopter ever built. Sitting in a hangar, grounded, because nobody can figure out why it won't fly right. Inside that hangar, 400 engineers, test pilots, and executives are about to find out they've been asking the wrong people. A door opens at the side of the building. Not the main entrance, the service entrance, the one without a sign. A man walks in pushing a cleaning cart. Navy uniform, worn hands. A face that has seen more sky than anyone in this building will ever know. Nobody looks up. Nobody sees him. That's exactly what he needs. The first thing Daniel Mercer did every morning was listen. Not to an alarm, not to the radio, to the house, to the specific silence of a building where someone small was still sleeping, and the whole world was holding its breath around that fact. He lay still for 30 seconds, long enough to confirm the silence was intact, long enough to let his back settle into the day, which took longer than it used to, which was information he accepted without argument every morning and then set aside. Then he got up. The kitchen was 8 steps from the bedroom. He knew this without counting anymore. He knew the cold spot on the tile near the refrigerator and the way the third cabinet from the left stuck slightly in wet weather. He knew his kitchen the way pilots know their aircraft, not by thinking, by accumulated contact. He made the batter in 11 strokes. It had been 11 strokes for 4 years. His hands had arrived at 11 and stayed there because 11 was correct, and there was no reason to add a 12. The pancakes went on the pan. While they cooked, he opened Nora's lunchbox and stood looking at it for a moment. She was 8 years old and she hated cucumbers with a focused moral certainty that only an 8-year-old could bring to a vegetable. She had explained this to him once, very seriously, sitting at the kitchen table with the gravity of someone delivering a verdict. Cucumbers, she said, tasted like what sadness would taste like if sadness were a food. He put the cucumber in anyway. Then he tore a corner off the notepad by the refrigerator and wrote 5 words. Just eat the middle part. He folded it and tucked it next to the cucumber, because that was the deal they'd made without making it. A father who packed the thing he knew was right, and a daughter who ate around it because she understood he was trying. Small negotiations. The daily language of 2 people who loved each other and didn't always say so directly. He checked her folder. Signed the permission slip for the science museum trip he'd already put in his phone. Confirmed the sneakers were by the door. November of last year, he'd spent 11 minutes hunting for a left sneaker that turned out to be inside a pillowcase, for reasons Nora had found completely logical and he had not. The sneakers were by the door. He rinsed his coffee mug, dried it, set it back in the same spot on the shelf where it lived. Some people would call that compulsive. Daniel called it knowing where things were when you needed them. He stepped over the 3rd stair on his way back down the hall. It creaked no matter where you stepped on it, and he had learned to step over it entirely. 12 extra minutes of sleep for Nora, purchased daily at the cost of a slightly wider stride. He'd been doing this for 5 years, since Catherine. He didn't say that part out loud. He didn't need to. It was just the frame around everything, the before and the after. The reason the house was this house and the job was this job, and the alarm was set for the time it was set for. 5 years ago, Catherine had been alive, and their life had been a different shape entirely. And then she wasn't, and it wasn't, and he had rebuilt what remained into something functional and small and sufficient. Sufficient. That was the word he used. Not good, not happy, sufficient. He would revise that assessment later, but not yet. Halcyon Aerospace occupies a campus in edge of Boulder that had been built in stages, the way successful companies get built. Each edition slightly more confident than the last. The main building was glass and steel and ambition. The hangars were where the real work happened. Daniel parked in the far corner of the lot designated for facilities and maintenance staff. Not because he was required to, because the far corner was closest to the side entrance, which was the entrance he used, which had a slightly shorter walk to the supply room where his cart lived. Efficiency, same reason. He signed in at 6:07, collected his route from the clip on Sylvia Trent's office door. Sylvia managed the facilities team and had the organized calm of someone who had dealt with every variety of human unpredictability and sorted it into workable categories. She wasn't in yet. She arrived at 7:30, and the clip was always stocked before she left the night before. He filled his cart, started his route. Halcyon Aerospace employed 462 people. Daniel knew the building the way he knew his kitchen. Which corridor smelled like burnt coffee by 8 a.m.? Which engineer left the same 3 mechanical pencils on the edge of the same workbench every day, and retrieved them with the same muted alarm every afternoon? Which bathroom nearest the avionics lab needed the towel dispenser checked first, because someone was always running it empty by noon? He knew the building because he was in it every day, and he paid attention, and paying attention was simply what he did. Had always done, in cockpits for 20 years. Now in hallways. The attention didn't go anywhere. It just changed what it was attending to. He pushed his cart into Hangar 7 at 6:19 and stopped, not dramatically, a gradual slowing, like water before a bend. The Griffin X9 sat in the center of the hangar floor under industrial lights, and it was the most expensive and complicated thing Daniel had been this close to in 3 years, and his body knew it before his mind caught up. Some reactions aren't learned, they're installed. $22 million of carbon fiber and composite alloys, and a fly-by-wire control system that 3 branches of the military were prepared to order 400 units of, contingent on a demonstration 3 weeks away that, from everything Daniel had overheard in 8 months of early mornings, was not going well. He stood for a moment, then he walked toward it, slowly. Not a decision exactly, gravity. He moved around the tail assembly. His eyes tracked the anti-torque rotor, the blade pitch links, the junction where the tail boom met the main fuselage. He crouched slightly to look at the tail rotor drive shaft, where it disappeared into the gearbox housing. There, a wear pattern on the dampener bracket that didn't belong. The bracket was vibrating at a frequency it wasn't designed for. You could see it in the contact marks. Microfretting, probably. The kind of thing you'd feel as a seat vibration at low RPM, subtle enough to dismiss. The kind of thing that became a controllability issue at transition speeds. He stood back up. You're looking at the wrong place. He turned. A man in his 60s stood near the engineering workbench. Gray hair that might have been red once. The face of someone who had spent decades being right about things and had arrived at a kind of unhurried patience about it. Clifford Haynes. Daniel had seen him many times in 8 months. They had never spoken. The tail rotor, Daniel said. What about it? Harmonic coupling in the dampener bracket. The assembly is running off its design resonance frequency. You'll feel it first at low RPM. At transition speeds it gets worse. Clifford looked at him, set his tablet down. The look of a man whose categories had just quietly failed him. How much worse, he said. Depends on your transition profile. Worse enough. Clifford picked up his tablet. I'm going to need to run a spectral analysis. Yeah, Daniel said. You probably should. Clifford Haynes. He extended his hand. Daniel Mercer. They shook hands. Clifford's grip confirmed what his face suggested. A man who had built things with his hands and still did. How? He stopped. Restarted. You're on the facilities team, yes. A pause that held several questions Clifford chose not to ask yet. I'll run the analysis this morning, he said, already turning to his workbench. Daniel got his mop out. They started arriving at 7:30. Engineers, technicians, project managers. The particular human ecosystem of a company running against a deadline. Daniel knew their rhythms. 8 months of early starts teaches you who goes for coffee first, who pulls up yesterday's data before taking their jacket off, who stands at the mezzanine window and stares at the Griffin X9 like they're waiting for it to explain itself. He also knew, with complete clarity, that none of them saw him. Not cruelly, not deliberately. He was part of the infrastructure, the same way the ventilation system was part of the infrastructure. Present. Functional. Not worth separate attention. He had chosen this. He reminded himself of this when it was useful and tried not to think about it when it wasn't. He heard her before she appeared. Heels on concrete, unhurried and precise. The sound of someone who had long ago decided that appearing rushed was a form of weakness. Victoria Ashford walked into Hangar 7 at 7:58, and the quality of the room's attention and shifted the way air pressure shifts before weather. Not visibly. Just measurably, if you were paying attention. She was 35 years old and looked like what she was. The daughter and heir of Gerald Ashford, who had built Halcyon from a 3-man operation in a leased hangar into a company with 462 employees and Department of Defense contracts. Gerald had died 4 years ago. Victoria had taken the company and the board and the legacy and the weight of all of it and had been running hard ever since under the constant low-level scrutiny of people waiting to see if she dropped something. She hadn't dropped anything. Dark blazer, dark slacks, hair controlled with the precision of someone who understood that everything communicated. Behind her, the head of engineering, 2 project managers, the avionics lead, a woman with a camera from the content team, and 3 others. Good morning. Her voice carried without effort. Where are we? The head of engineering, a man named Pollard who looked like he'd been awake since Tuesday, stepped forward. Mrs. Ashford. Overnight diagnostics on the fly-by-wire integration are complete, and the delay is still present. 0.4 seconds in the collective response during speed transitions. We've isolated it to the sensor array interaction with E. Weeks, she said. Yes, 3 weeks until the demonstration. $800 million and a 10-year contract on the table. So when you say the delay is still present, what I'm hearing is that nothing has changed. Pollard opened his mouth. Rowan Aldrich stepped forward. 46 years old, former Navy. The face of someone who had stripped away everything that wasn't load-bearing. He was the chief test pilot, and he moved like it. The delay isn't a software problem, Aldrich said. It's a physical limitation in the hydraulic response architecture. We can tune the software indefinitely. The underlying system doesn't respond fast enough at transition speeds. How many hours do you have in rotorcraft? 8,740. 8,740 hours. And 0.4 seconds is where you're drawing the line. At 140 knots, yes. Captain Aldrich. This aircraft was designed for environments where people are actively trying to kill it. You're telling me it's being grounded by a response time shorter than a human blink. I'm telling you that until the hydraulic integration is corrected, I will not fly this aircraft at full demonstration parameters. He said it without heat. A statement of fact. That's my professional assessment and my decision as chief test pilot. The room held very still. Victoria looked at him for 3 seconds. Clean out your locker, she said. HR will be in touch. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Aldrich looked at her for a moment, the way a man looks at a thing when he's decided he's seen enough of it. He set his tablet on the nearest workstation and walked out. The camera operator kept filming. Victoria turned to the room. I need a pilot who can do the job we're paying them to do. If anyone has suggestions, I'm listening. Otherwise, get back to work. She turned and stopped. Later, she couldn't fully account for what made her stop. She'd been looking past the assembled group toward the Griffin X9, running the calculations she was always running. 3 weeks. What's possible in 3 weeks? When she caught something at the edge of her vision. The facilities worker. Standing near the far wall. Looking at the aircraft. Not the way engineers looked at it. Not cataloging problems. Not calculating costs. Looking at it the way you look at something you already understand. She'd seen that look before.
Once.
On her father's face, and standing in this hangar, when the Griffin was still a set of blueprints, and Gerald Ashford had looked at what it was going to become and simply known. Hey, she raised her voice. Facilities, what's your name? He looked up. Average height, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that had been in weather. Work clothes, name tag she was too far away to read. Daniel, he said. She walked toward him, because stillness was a concession. Daniel, how long with Halcyon? 8 months. 8 months, close enough to read the tag now. Daniel. Facilities. 8 months watching us try to get this aircraft operational. She turned, addressing the room, the camera, the 50 people in various stages of tension. You know what I appreciate about this? This man comes in every day, does his job. No reports about hydraulic response times. No lists of reasons why the thing can't be done. A few people laughed, uncertain laughs. Tell you what, Daniel. She was performing and she knew it. Stopping mid-performance was worse than continuing. You want to make history today? Fly the Griffin X9 one circuit of this hangar. Just one. You do that and I will personally guarantee you a story worth telling. A beat, the room waiting. In fact, I'll marry you. The hangar exploded. Real laughter. The kind that breaks what a room has been holding. Phones came out. The camera operator was smiling. Daniel did not laugh. He looked at Victoria Ashford. His expression was not embarrassment, not flustered uncertainty, not the thing the room was waiting for to complete the joke. He looked at her with the calm of someone deciding whether a question merits an answer. Then he looked at the Griffin X9, actually looked, and said quietly, The tail rotor assembly is running at a resonant frequency that's going to couple destructively with the main drive shaft at transition speeds. You'll feel it as an airframe vibration around 80 knots. By 120, you have a controllability problem that no software patch addresses, because it's not a software problem. The laughter stopped, like a dial turned. Need to pull the tail gearbox, machine new dampener brackets to spec, and retorque the drive shaft coupling. 3-day job for a competent crew. Fixes the majority of your transition lag. He looked at her. But thank you for the offer. I'm fine where I am. He picked up his mop and went back to work. Victoria stood in the center of her hangar and felt something she rarely felt. She felt the room looking at her differently than it had been looking at her 30 seconds ago. Not with sympathy, not against her, with something more unsettling than either. Recalibration. She watched Daniel Mercer push his cart in the methodical, unhurried way he'd been pushing it before she'd made him part of her performance. She watched Clifford Haynes across the hangar set his tablet down with a deliberateness that communicated something without saying it. She walked to him. Clifford. He looked at her. Have you spoken to him before today? A pause. 1 second too long, this morning, briefly, and he picked up his tablet and turned it toward her. On the screen, a spectral analysis cued at 6:43 a.m. The numbers on the dampener bracket read exactly the way someone had just described them to her from across a hangar floor. He walked in at 6:15, Clifford said, and knew where to look. She looked at the analysis, then at Daniel still working the far wall, then back. Who is he, she said. I don't know, Clifford said, but I think we should find out. She didn't answer. She was already calculating. The video hit 300,000 views before noon. She saw it on Pollard's screen walking past his office, then on Toos in the corridor. Then her assistant put it on her desk with a look that communicated something between alarm and awe. 40 seconds. Daniel's face looking up, her voice making the joke, his response about the tail rotor, the silence after, her own face in the final frames, holding something she hadn't meant to show. She watched it twice, then called legal, then called PR. Then sat for a moment in her office looking at the mountains through the window and thinking about her father, which she tried not to do at work because it didn't help. Gerald Ashford had built Halcyon by seeing things other people missed. Not technology specifically, people. He had an eye for the person in the room who knew something essential and hadn't been asked the right question yet. He'd told her this when she was 16, and she'd filed it away as one of his things, the aphorisms he collected, and she hadn't thought about it in years. She was thinking about it now. She picked up her phone, called Clifford. Find out who he is, she said. Everything. I was going to do that anyway, Clifford said. She hung up. The video hit 2 million by the time she left the building. Daniel found out about the video from Sylvia Trent, who sat down across from him at the break table at noon and turned her phone around without a word. He watched it once, pushed the phone back. Does it bother you? Sylvia said. Should it? She considered this with real seriousness. Most people would want the ground to open up or want a publicist. You appear to want... 8 months ago I was nobody. He unwrapped his sandwich. Sir turkey, cheddar, still no mustard because he kept forgetting to buy it. Today I'm still nobody, but 2 million people have seen my face. That's statistically interesting. You are a strange man, Daniel Mercer. I've been told. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding how much to say. Clifford Haynes has been in his office for 2 hours running records searches, she said. I'm not supposed to know that. I know it because his office shares a wall with the records room, and he talks to himself when he's looking for something. Daniel ate his sandwich. Okay, he said. Is there something he's going to find? He thought about the card in his wallet. The laminated one, edges worn, that he'd carried for 3 years without examining too carefully why. Some things you keep not because they're useful, but because setting them down feels like a different kind of loss. Yes, he said. Sylvia nodded once. The nod of a woman who had learned when to stop asking. He finished his sandwich, balled up the wrapper. Shoot! I have the southeast corridor still, he said. I know, she said. I made the route. He picked up his cart and went back to work. The afternoon moved the way it always moved. Offices, corridors, bathrooms, the supply closet on the south hall. He moved through the building, and the building moved around him, and nobody stopped him or spoke to him except to say excuse me or thanks when he held a door. Invisible, he had built this. He reminded himself of that when it pinched. He had chosen this life because it was what Nora needed and what he could give her without breaking. Stability, presence, the 3 o'clock pickup, every day, no exceptions. He had chosen correctly. He still believed that. At 2:52 he changed out of his work clothes in the locker room, pulled on jeans and his jacket, and walked to his truck. 3:02 he was in the lot. 3:04 he was pulling out onto the road. Nora came out of school 7th in the stream of kids, purple jacket, backpack, 2 braids holding from morning. The braids were his calibration. Intact braids meant a manageable day. Braids loose by noon meant events had occurred. Both braids? Intact. She saw his truck and ran. He hoped she would always run. He knew she might not someday. He chose not to think about that. She climbed in and he had her buckled before she'd finished her second sentence, which was about a girl named Emma and a video and his face on an iPad. Emma's mom showed everyone at pickup, Nora said. You were on a screen. I know. There was a helicopter. Yes. And you said something about the helicopter and everyone went quiet. She looked at him. He considered this honestly. No. I was answering a question nobody had asked me yet. She thought about that. That's kind of the same thing. Maybe. She watched the road for a moment. Then, Dad, were you in the Air Force? Yes. For a long time. 20 years. The mountains were ahead of them, upper elevations white with early snow catching the last of the afternoon light. Nora looked at them. He looked at the road. How come you don't talk about the flying part, she said. Not an accusation, a real question. Because it ended, he said. And for a while, talking about it felt like standing at a door that wasn't going to open. So I stopped standing there. She was quiet for a long time. The way she was quiet when she was storing something to come back to later. Do you miss it, she said. He thought about the hangar that morning, the Griffin X9 under the lights, the thing that had happened in his hands when he walked close enough to read the wear pattern on the bracket, the recognition, old knowledge waking up unhurried, certain of itself. Every day, he said. She looked at him, then out the window. Then she reached over and turned the radio on low, which was what she did when she'd heard something that needed time to settle. They drove the rest of the way home, with the mountains keeping pace alongside them, and the radio playing something neither of them knew, and the evening coming down over Boulder in long gold bars of light. He stepped over the 3rd stair when they got home. She stepped over it too, without being told. Some things you just learn to do. The video hit 9 million views overnight. Daniel was asleep when it crossed that number, which was how it should be. The internet didn't require his participation to have opinions about him, and he saw no reason to stay awake supervising it. He found out at 6:03 when Clifford texted him a screenshot, just the number, no message attached. Clifford was not a man who added words when a number said the thing adequately. Daniel looked at it for 3 seconds, put the phone face down, made the batter, 11 strokes. The pancakes went on the pan, and he stood at the stove and listened to the house and thought about the tail rotor bracket, and whether Clifford had run the full spectral analysis yet, or just the preliminary, and whether the dampener failure mode extended to the drive shaft coupling or was isolated to the bracket assembly, and what the repair timeline looked like against the demonstration date. He was thinking about this instead of the 9 million people who had watched his face on a screen, because the 90 million people were not a problem he could solve before 7 a.m. The tail rotor was. Nora came down at 6:48, with her hair not yet braided and one shoe already on, which was a specific kind of morning he'd learned to navigate without comment. He braided her hair while she ate. She directed him with the authority of someone who had very clear opinions about tension and part placement. Not that tight. I know. Last time you did it too tight. I'll do it less tight. The same amount less tight as yesterday or more less tight. I'll calibrate. She accepted this. He finished the second braid. She picked up her fork. He went to make her lunch and stood in front of the refrigerator and saw the cucumber and thought about the note, and then thought about whether 9 million people knowing his face changed anything about the cucumber. It didn't. He put the cucumber in, wrote the note, 5 words, same as always. Just eat the middle part, tucked it next to the cucumber. Closed the lunchbox. Some things you're doing because they're right, not because the world hasn't changed, but because what you're doing doesn't depend on the world staying the same. The parking lot at Halcyon had 3 news vans in it by the time Daniel arrived. They were clustered near the main entrance with their satellite equipment and their particular purposeful restlessness. One reporter was doing a stand-up with the building in the background. Another was on her phone, pacing. Daniel drove past them to the side entrance. The security guard there was a man named Phil who had worked the 6 a.m. shift for 11 years and had the settled demeanor of someone who had decided exactly which things were worth caring about. Phil looked at Daniel, looked at the news vans, looked back. Interesting morning, Phil said. Seems like, Daniel said. Phil buzzed him through. Inside the building felt different, not loudly. The way a room feels different when the people in it have all recently received the same piece of information. A shifted quality. People in corridors who didn't usually make eye contact, making eye contact. The head of avionics nodding at him near the elevator, in a way that held more weight than a nod usually held. He got his cart, started his route. In Hangar 7, Clifford was already at the tail rotor assembly with 3 engineers and a set of precision measurement tools. The gearbox panel was open. The dampener bracket was out. On the workbench next to it, a spectral analysis printout covered in Clifford's annotations. Clifford looked up when Daniel came in. Full analysis confirms it, he said without preamble. The bracket failure mode matches a known pattern in third-generation hydraulic couplings under asymmetric load cycling. We had indicators in the data for weeks. Daniel set down his cart. Well, how far back does the data go? Further than anyone ran the query. Clifford's voice was even. The evenness of a man containing something. There are 3 engineers who flagged anomalies in their individual reports over the past 2 months. The flags weren't cross-referenced. Nobody ran the query that would have connected them, because nobody was looking for a connection. Because nobody was looking. They stood with that for a moment. The 3 engineers nearby were very focused on their measurement tools. Timeline to fix, Daniel said. 3 days minimum. New brackets need to be machined to revised spec. Drive shaft retorqued. Full resonance test at graduated RPM before any flight. Clifford picked up his annotated printout. That leaves 18 days before the demonstration. Tight, but achievable if nothing else surfaces. Assume something else will surface. I am. Then you have less than 18 days. Yes, a pause. That's why I need you to come look at the main rotor drive system this afternoon. There's a technician named Garrett who's been tracking a hydraulic pressure anomaly in System 3 for approximately 11 weeks. He's been putting it in his individual maintenance logs. Nobody above him has seen the logs. Daniel looked at the open gearbox panel, at the bracket sitting on the workbench, at the 6 weeks of data that had been present and unread. Set it up, he said. After my route. He picked up his cart, went back to the floor. She found him at 223, in the second-floor corridor outside the procurement offices. He was cleaning the windows that looked over the small company airfield, working in his usual left-to-right pattern. When she came around the corner with the focused velocity of someone who had made a decision and was now executing it, she stopped a few feet away. He kept working. I owe you an apology, she said. He set down his cloth, turned. She was closer than she'd been in the hangar. No audience. No camera. Just the corridor and the afternoon light and 2 people without the buffer of performance between them. She looked different without the performance. Not younger exactly. More present. Like the thing she was when she wasn't being watched had more dimensions than the thing she was when she was. Yesterday morning, she said, in the hangar, in front of everyone. She held his gaze, didn't manage it or soften it. That was cruel. I used you as entertainment because you were available and because I could. The fact that it didn't go the way I intended doesn't change what I was doing. He waited. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her for a moment, checking whether it was real. Some apologies are performance too. This one had the texture of something that had cost her something to say. Accept it, he said. She let out a breath. Just slightly. I'd like to offer you a consulting role, she said, moving directly to it. Part-time. Flexible hours. Focused on test program design and safety assessment. We'd structure everything around your existing schedule. 3 o'clock school pickup. Every day. Fine. Aldrich reinstated. With a public apology. Already in progress. He'll be back Monday. Full compensation review for maintenance and facilities staff. Not a review that produces a report. A review that produces changes. A pause shortly expected. Agreed, he looked at her. You're agreeing to all of this quickly. I am. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Not managing the question. Actually sitting with it. Because as I'm standing in a corridor as favor of fang of someone fantastic for and because the only leverage in this conversation is yours. She glanced toward the window, toward the airfield below. And because my father built this company by finding the people who knew things he didn't know, and then actually listening to them, I've been running it like I'm not allowed to not know things. Like not knowing something is a weakness instead of just a fact. She looked back at him. That's done now. He studied her face. Okay? Okay? She nodded once, the nod of someone confirming a coordinate. One more thing, she said. The video. It's at 9 million views and climbing. There will be media requests. Possibly people looking up your address. Halcyon has resources for managing that kind of attention if you want them. I don't have social media. The people who want to find you don't need you to have social media. He thought about Nora, about reporters at school pickup, about the particular vulnerability of a life built to be small. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. She turned to go, then stopped. Your daughter, Nora, how old is she? He looked at her. 8. And it's just the two of you? Yes. She nodded slowly. Something moved across her face that she didn't comment on. Monday, she said. 3rd floor conference room, 7 a.m. She walked away. He watched her go, then turned back to the window and picked up his cloth and finished the section he'd been working on. Left to right, clean behind him. He met Garrett that afternoon in the sus corridor. Not a formal meeting. Clifford had pointed Garrett out near the hangar entrance, and then found somewhere else to be, which Daniel appreciated. Some conversations needed 2 people and a 3rd person would change their shape. Garrett was 26, maybe 27. The build of someone who worked with his hands. The face of someone who had been trying to tell something to someone for a long time, and had gotten very practiced at the beginning of that conversation, and never gotten to see the end of it. You're the person from the video, Garrett said. I'm the person asking about System 3 hydraulic pressure, Daniel said. Garrett looked at him for a moment. Then, 11 weeks ago I started seeing intermittent pressure drops in the System 3 line. Not large, 0.8 psi variance, sometimes up to 1.2. Always during transition maneuvers. I logged it every time. Who did the logs go to? My section supervisor, then department lead, and nothing. He said it without bitterness. Just the fact of it. I flagged it twice in the weekly maintenance summary. I asked twice if someone was looking at it. I was told it was within acceptable variance. Is it within acceptable variance? At static test conditions, yes. At transition speeds with the hydraulic system under load, no. He paused. At full demonstration specs, with the collective demand on the hydraulic system during an aggressive Navuva sequence, that variance becomes a pressure dropout event. Short, maybe half a second. But the fly-by-wire system reads it as a sensor fault and initiates a compensation cycle, which adds a latency. He looked at Daniel. That's your 0.4-second delay, or most of it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Show me the logs, he said. Garrett showed him the logs. They stood in the south corridor for 40 minutes, while Garrett walked him through 11 weeks of careful, precise documentation that no one above him had read. The numbers were clear. The pattern was clear. The solution Garrett had sketched in the margin of his most recent log, a pressure regulator adjustment that would take 40 minutes to implement, was also clear. 40 minutes, Daniel said, looking at the sketch. Maybe 35 if I have the right wrench. Daniel looked at him. How many people know you've been tracking this? Me. Now you. Go find Clifford Haynes. Bring your logs. All of them. Garrett looked at him. Clifford Haynes as in, yes. Garrett straightened slightly. The posture of someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been told they don't have to carry it that way anymore.
Okay, he said.
Yeah. Okay. He went. Daniel stood in the south corridor for a moment after he left, thinking about the pressure regulator. About 11 weeks. About how much of what was wrong in any system, any organization, any aircraft, was already known by someone who hadn't been asked. Then he went to finish his route. He started Monday in the 3rd floor conference room. Not in a new uniform, not with a new badge or a new parking spot or any of the external markers of a changed status. The same truck in the same corner of the lot, the same side entrance, just a different room at the end of the walk. Clifford was there. 3 engineers from the systems team. Someone had brought coffee and placed it in the center of the table without fanfare, which Daniel appreciated. They worked. That was what it was, work. The kind without an audience. You sit down with the thing that isn't working and you stop trying to argue it into working and start listening to what it's actually telling you. Daniel asked questions, not to demonstrate knowledge, to get specific information he needed to solve specific problems. Why this hydraulic coupling over the alternatives? What were the thermal performance trade-offs? When did the resonance issue first appear, and what were the exact conditions? The engineers answered. Carefully at first, with the caution of people who had learned that what they said could be held against them, then less. Cascafalis. Then with the accelerating openness of people who had been sitting on information for a long time, and were finally in a room where the information was welcome. By noon they had a complete map of every known issue with the Griffin X9 control system. Not just the tail rotor and the System 3 hydraulics. Everything. The things in official reports and the things in corridors, and the things living in the careful private observations of people who'd been watching the aircraft and hadn't been invited to the meetings where decisions got made. It was a longer list than anyone had said out loud. It was also a fixable list. Those were not always the same thing, and the fact that they were both true here mattered. Victoria came in at 2 o'clock, sat at the end of the table, listened. She didn't ask questions that suggested she already knew the answers. She asked questions that suggested she was trying to understand, which was a different thing and harder to do. When the senior systems engineer finished explaining the full scope of the hydraulic integration problem, Victoria was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known this was the full scope?" she said. The engineer looked at her. "About 4 months. And you didn't," she stopped herself. "Why didn't you bring it to me?" A pause that held the answer without saying it. "Because the last person who brought you something you didn't want to hear," the engineer said carefully, "was Aldrich." Victoria absorbed this. She didn't deflect, didn't manage it, just absorbed it. "That's over," she said. Same words she'd said to Daniel in the corridor, but this time in a room with 7 people who needed to hear them. "Bring me things, all the things. If something need to be said and you're waiting for the right moment is now, and it has been for a while." Nobody answered immediately. Then the engineer opened the next page of his notes, and they kept working. That evening, after Nora was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the day's technical documentation and a glass of water and the particular quiet of a house where something small is sleeping nearby. He'd been doing this kind of work for 3 years before the injury. The technical analysis, the systems thinking, the translation between what a pilot feels in a cockpit and what an engineer needs to know to fix it. He'd been good at it. He'd known he was good at it the way you know things that live in your hands rather than your head. And then it had been gone. And he'd let it be gone because the alternative required wanting something. And wanting something meant the possibility of losing it. And he'd already lost enough. He looked at the documentation on the table. Garrett's hydraulic logs. Clifford's spectral analysis. The systems engineer's 4 months of private knowledge now on paper where it could be used. He thought about the 40 minutes it would take to fix the pressure regulator. 11 weeks Garrett had been carrying that. 11 weeks of knowing the answer and not being asked. He put the documentation in order, stacked it neatly, set it on the counter where he'd see it in the morning. Then he went to check on Nora. She was asleep on her side, one hand under her cheek, the 3 rocks from the park arranged on her windowsill in some classification system he'd ask her about in the morning. The curtain was open slightly, and the moonlight came through and laid a stripe across her blanket. He stood in the doorway. On the shelf above her bed, a trimmed photograph. Catherine at 28, caught mid-law at something off-camera, hair loose, sunlight behind her. Nora had Catherine's nose and the particular quality of her attention. The way she gave things her full focus without making a performance of it. He looked at the photograph for a moment. Catherine had been the one who could see him clearly when he was going sideways, not by confronting him. By saying true things in the easy tone of someone who assumed the truth was obvious and was mildly surprised it needed saying. She'd said once, near the end, when the medication made the nights long and conversation was one of the few things that still felt like itself. "You have a habit of deciding things are over before they're over. Try to notice when you're doing that." He had not been good at noticing. He was trying to get better. He closed Nora's door softly, went back to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where he kept the things that mattered. Nora's drawings, his own enlistment photo, younger face, expression not yet weathered to what it had become. And at the back an envelope he'd put there 10 days ago and not opened since the first reading. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Washington, D.C. took it out. Didn't open it, just held it. The letter described his spinal nerve injury in clinical terms that he'd long since translated into plain English. Scar tissue compressing nerve roots at L4 and L5. Intermittent loss of sensation in the left leg. Chronic pain at the injury site, functional but limited. Not combat ready, retired. And then the part he'd read twice and put away. A surgical option. A neurosurgeon named Grayson Wick at Walter Reed who specialized in exactly this kind of injury. A procedure with a 74% probability of sufficient recovery to meet FAA civilian aviation medical standards. Not military, civilian. Limited conditions. Visual flight rules, dual controls, maximum 2-hour operations. But not nothing. He set the envelope on the table, stared at it. The thing about 74% was that it required you to want the outcome. And wanting the outcome opened you to the 26%. And the 26% was the part he'd been managing around for 3 years. The part where you reach for something and it's not there. He'd been managing around it successfully. He just wasn't sure successful was the same as right. He put the envelope back in the drawer, closed it, went to bed, lay in the dark for a while listening to the house. Then he got up, went back to the kitchen, took the envelope out and put it on the counter where he'd put the technical documentation, where he'd see it in the morning, where he could not pretend it wasn't there. He went back to bed. This time he slept. On day 12 of Daniel's consulting work, Clifford came into the conference room at 8:47 and closed the door, which was not something Clifford did. Daniel was at the table with a tablet and the annotated drive shaft schematics. He looked up. Clifford sat down, put his tablet face down. The face-down tablet was worse than the closed door. "There was a meeting last night," Clifford said. "I wasn't in it. Someone who was in it told me because they thought I should know." Daniel waited. Victoria. 2 board members. Pollard. Clifford's voice was careful, accurate. He was describing things as they were and trusting Daniel to draw the conclusion. Reeves and Hartwell want to proceed with the demonstration at the original date. Original specs. The hydraulic integration still has residual lag at full demonstration parameters, reduced significantly. But at high speed, aggressive maneuvers, the lag remains outside what Aldrich would call acceptable. A pause. Victoria didn't say no. The room was quiet. "She said she'd consider it," Clifford said. "She said it was a business decision as much as a technical one. She said they were exploring options." Daniel looked at the schematic on the table. The drive shaft coupling diagram. The measurements that had been wrong and were now right because someone had finally sat down and listened to what the aircraft was telling them. He thought about a family in Pensacola, a letter he'd written, the specific weight of a sentence that began, "It is with profound regret." He stood up. "Where is she?" he said. He didn't knock. He'd made that decision somewhere between the 3rd floor conference room and the elevator. Knocking was a request for permission, and he wasn't here to request permission. He wasn't here to threaten or to perform. He was here because of Aldrich walking out of the hangar carrying the weight of being right, and because of Garrett's 11 weeks, and because of a letter to Pensacola, and because some things were too important for the particular cowardice of waiting for a better moment. He pushed the door open. Victoria was at her desk, alone. She looked up. She saw his face. "Close the door," she said. He did. He walked to her desk and put a sheet of paper on it, handwritten, 3 columns. He'd written it in the 40 minutes between Clifford telling him and this moment, best case, likely case, worst case, the failure modes, the probability distributions, the cascade sequences at full demonstration specs with the current state of hydraulic integration. Not dressed up, not softened, just the physics which didn't negotiate. She looked at it. He let her look. "I wrote letters," he said, "to 2 families. Pilots who didn't come back from missions they had every reason to come back from." His voice was level. This wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. Both times there was a maintenance issue that someone had categorized as manageable risk. Both times the decision to proceed was made by people balancing other factors, real factors, budget, timeline, contract terms. "I understand those factors." She was looking at the paper, not at him. "The physics doesn't know about the factors," he said. "The physics just waits for you to be wrong. And if a pilot takes the Griffin X9 to full demonstration specs with the current hydraulic state, the physics is going to do what it does, regardless of what Reeves and Hartwell think about the timeline." Silence. "If you move forward with this decision," he said, "I will contact the DoD procurement office directly, and I will resign." She looked up. You'd burn this down, she said. I'd tell the truth. What happens after that isn't mine to control. She looked at him for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the window. Below the company airfield, the Griffin X-9 partially visible through the open hangar door, patient and still. My father built something here, she said. Not to the room, to the window, to whatever she was working through. He built it on the belief that quality is not a negotiable variable, that the person flying what you make deserves to trust what you made. She stopped. I inherited that belief. I also inherited a board, 2 major investors, a contract pipeline that depends on this demonstration, and 462 people whose jobs depend on all of the above. She was quiet for a moment. I've been protecting the wrong things, she said, quietly, like something she'd known for a while and was saying out loud for the first time. The board, the timeline, my own position. I've been protecting the company and telling myself that's the same as protecting what the company is for. She turned from the window. Delay the demonstration. Fix the hydraulic integration properly. Tell Dodd the truth about why. She held his gaze. That's the decision. He looked at her. You're certain, he said. No, she said. But I'm going to do it anyway. The certainty can come after. He nodded. Once. He picked up the paper from her desk, folded it, tucked it in his jacket pocket. He didn't say thank you. Whoops, it wasn't a favor. It was the favor, and it was the right thing, and the right following didn't require gratitude. It required doing. He walked to the door. Daniel, she said. He turned. I haven't asked. She looked at him steadily. The letter from Walter Reed. Clifford mentioned it. He didn't mean to. He waited. Is that something you're going to do? He thought about the envelope on his kitchen counter. About 74%. About 26%. About Catherine saying you decide things are over before they're over. I don't know yet, he said. She nodded. Okay. He left. The drive home was familiar, and the radio was low, and the mountains held their positions as they always did, and he thought about the letter on the counter, and the drawer he'd taken it out of, and whether some decisions made themselves once you stopped fighting them. He thought about Nora, about the drawing she'd made, the helicopter, 2 figures in the cockpit. He thought about what she'd said when he told her he missed flying. She'd turned the radio on, and let the silence be what it needed to be. He parked in front of the school at 3:01. She came out fourth in the stream. Purple jacket, one braid slightly looser than the other, which meant afternoon had been eventful but manageable. She climbed in. He buckled her. How was the cucumber, he said. She gave him the look. The one that said she knew what he was doing and was choosing to engage with it anyway. I ate the whole thing. She said. He looked at her, all of it. Don't make it weird, Dad. He drove. She told him about a project on weather systems, about a boy in her class named Oliver, who had very confident wrong opinions about how tornadoes formed, about the way Mrs. Calloway had corrected him without making him feel bad, which Nora had found instructive. She's good at that, Nora said. Correcting people without making them feel stupid. That's a real skill, he said. You're good at it too. He glanced at her. Am I? You told me I was wrong about fractions last week, and I didn't even feel bad. I just felt like I understood it now. She looked at the road. I think it's because you don't make the wrong part the main thing. You make the right way the main thing. He drove for a moment. When did you get this good at noticing things, he said. I've always been good at noticing things. She looked at him. You just started noticing that I noticed. He drove the rest of the way home, with that sitting in the car between them. And when he stepped over the 3rd stair that evening, he thought about it again. And when he sat down at the kitchen table with the technical documentation and the envelope from Walter Reed side by side, he thought about it one more time. His 8-year-old daughter, noticing things. The apple, he thought, not falling far. He reached for the envelope, opened it, read it again. And this time when he finished, he didn't put it back in the drawer. He left it on the table, and went to bed with the knowledge that some decisions are already made by the time you get around to examining them. You just have to catch up to yourself. The call to Dr. Grayson Wick happened on a Tuesday evening at 8:17. Not planned. Not scheduled. Daniel had been sitting at the kitchen table with the Walter Reed letter in front of him and a glass of water he hadn't touched, and at some point forced the distance between reading the letter and doing something about it had become the only thing in the room, and he'd picked up the phone. Wick answered on the 2nd ring. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years fixing bodies that had been broken in service of something, and had arrived at a specific quality of unhurried attention. Mr. Mercer, he said. Doctor, a pause. I've read the letter several times. I thought you might. I have questions. Of course. The 74%, Daniel said. Walk me through the other 26. Wick didn't rush the answer, which was the right call. Roughly 20% of cases achieve partial improvement, meaningful reduction in chronic pain and nerve interference, measurable return of sensation in the affected leg, but not sufficient improvement to meet FAA's civilian medical standards for rotorcraft operations. A pause. The remaining 6% see no significant change from current status. The scar tissue either reforms or the nerve roots don't respond to decompression the way we'd anticipated. And the procedure itself, outpatient. Approximately 90 minutes under general anesthesia. The risk profile is low. You're a 40-year-old man in good physical condition with an isolated spinal injury. This isn't high-complexity neurosurgery. He paused. The complexity is in the recovery. The nerves need time to recalibrate. 8 to 10 weeks before we'd assess your readiness for aviation medical evaluation. 8 to 10 weeks. Daniel looked at the empty chair across from him. The chair where Nora ate breakfast. I have a daughter. 8 years old. I'm the only parent. I know. It's in your file. Wick's voice was steady. We have a social work coordinator who specializes in exactly this situation. We've done this before, Mr. Mercer. Families navigate it. Daniel was quiet for a moment. If the procedure works, he said, FAA clearance means what, specifically? Visual flight rules operations, dual control aircraft, maximum 2s per flight with mandatory rest intervals, no instrument-only conditions, no solo operations initially pending flight review, a pause. It's not what you had, but it's not nothing. Not nothing. He'd been living in the space between what he'd had and nothing for 3 years. It turned out that space had a name. It was called Not Nothing, and it was apparently available to him at 74% probability if he was willing to want it badly enough to risk the 26. When could it be scheduled, he said. I have an opening in 6 weeks. I'd hold it pending your decision. Don't hold it, Daniel said. Book it. A pause and, Wick said, I'll have the pre-op paperwork to you by end of week. Daniel set the phone down, sat with what he'd just done. Outside, Boulder had gone to dark and the mountains were invisible but present, same as always. The refrigerator hummed. The third stair didn't creak because nobody was on it. He'd said yes to something, out loud, to another person, who had written it into a calendar, which meant the 26% was real now. Not a theoretical risk, but an actual one, with a date attached. He breathed once, slowly. Okay. He got up, walked down the hall, pushed Nora's door open and stood in the doorway. She was asleep, one hand under her cheek, the 3 park rocks on the windowsill catching a slant of light from the street lamp outside. The curtain moved slightly. The house breathed around her. He looked at her for a long time. Then went back to the kitchen and washed the glass he hadn't drunk from and turned off the light and went to bed and slept. He told Nora on a Saturday, not because Saturday was planned, because she asked. They were at Eben G. Fine Park, the one along the creek where the water was running fast with snowmelt. And Nora was moving from rock to rock along the bank with the patience of a geologist on a deadline. And Daniel had been in his own head for most of the walk when she stopped and looked at him. Dad, Nora, you're doing the away thing. The away thing. Where you're here but also somewhere else at the same time. She picked up a flat gray stone, examined it. You've been doing it for 2 weeks. It's getting more obvious. He walked to where she was standing. The creek moved past them cold and purposeful. There's a letter, he said. From some doctors at a hospital in Washington. She looked up at him. They think there's a surgery that could help my back, my leg, the nerve damage from when I got hurt. He measured the words, not simplifying, just finding the ones that were accurate and manageable at the same time. If it works, I'd be able to fly again. Not the way I used to. Different conditions, smaller aircraft, but actually fly. Nora stood very still. She looked at the creek, at the water moving over the rocks, then back at him. Are you going to do it, she said. I already scheduled it. She absorbed this when, 6 weeks, and I'd stay with someone. Sylvia said she'd take you for the first week. Then we'd figure out the rest. She nodded slowly, turned the rock over in her hands. Are you scared? Yes. Of the surgery. Of wanting something, and then finding out I don't get it. He looked at the water. I've gotten good at not wanting things that might not happen. It's been useful, and it's also been a way of not fully being here. He paused. Your mom used to say I decide things are over before they're over. She was right about that. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, but Dad, you don't have flying right now. So you can't lose it, you can only get it or not get it. She set the rock back on the bank with care. It's not the same as losing something you have. He looked at her, 8 years old, standing at a creek bank in her purple jacket with her braids catching the light, saying the precise thing he'd spent 3 years unable to say to himself. When did you figure that out, he said. Just now, kind of. She looked at the rocks on the bank. Then at him. Was Mom scared? He was careful here. The care of someone who understood that the truth had shapes and the shape you chose mattered. Yes, he said. She was scared. She cried sometimes when she thought I was asleep. She was angry sometimes, too. Being sick and brave at the same time is hard. He paused. But she did it anyway. Every day she did it anyway. Nora nodded. Then you should do the surgery, she said, simply. The way she said things that were obvious to her. And I want to know everything, not the short version you give me when you think I can't handle the long version. The real version. He looked at her for a moment. The real version, he said. Yes, okay, he put his hand on her shoulder. The real version is that I'm scared and I'm doing it anyway, and in 6 weeks, we'll both know how it turns out. She leaned slightly into him, just slightly. The specific lean of a person who is being strong and also wants to be held at the same time. Okay, she said. That's the version I wanted. They stayed at the creek a little longer. She found 2 more rocks. He didn't find any because he wasn't really looking. He was looking at the water and thinking about 74% and about how the shape of a thing changes when someone you love says it back to you in plain language. On the way home, she put the new rocks in her jacket pockets and talked about weather systems, which she was still thinking about from school, and about Oliver with his wrong opinions about tornadoes, and about Mrs. Calloway who corrected people well. He listened, drove. The mountains kept pace alongside them. Victoria called an all-hands on a Wednesday morning. The full company, main auditorium. 462 people plus contractors. Daniel stood near the back wall with Garrett, who was also near the back, and Sylvia Trent, who was 3 people to his left with her arms across the bus, someone who had been waiting for a specific bus for a long time and was watching it finally approach. Victoria walked out at 8:02. No blazer, a gray sweater and dark slacks, and her hair less controlled than usual, either accidental or deliberate. With Victoria Ashford, Daniel had learned very little was accidental. She stood at the front of the room and looked at 462 people looking back at her, and said nothing for a moment, just stood there, which was the bravest thing he'd seen her do, including the board confrontation, including the corridor decision. The moment in her office when she'd looked at the handwritten failure mode analysis and turned to the window and said she'd been protecting the wrong thing, standing in front of 400 people and simply being present before you speak. Not performing confidence, being a person in a room. 16 days ago, she said, I stood in Hangar 7 and made a joke at an employee's expense. In front of cameras, in front of most of you. She paused. I want to say something clearly before I say anything else. The fact that the joke backfired does not make what I'm about to say an apology about the backfire. I was unkind before I knew who he was. That's the thing I have to own. The room was very still. I've been running this company, she said. Like the most important thing I had to protect was the contract value, the revenue, my own position. A pause. My father built Halcyon on the idea that the best engineering comes from people who feel safe enough to tell the truth. He said it to me when I was 16 and I thought I understood it, and I didn't, not really. Not until recently. She stopped, looked at the room. I have created a culture here where people were afraid to tell me things I didn't want to hear. Not always explicitly punished it, but because I implicitly punished it, and the difference between those two things is smaller than I thought. She paused. Rowan Aldrich is back on Monday. He was right and I fired him, and that was wrong. A sound moved through the room. Not a murmur, an exhale. 462 people releasing something simultaneously. Effect immediately. We have an open reporting system for safety and technical concerns. Anonymous if you choose. Direct to me if you prefer. There are no consequences for raising issues. There will be consequences for suppressing them. She looked at the room steadily. HR and finance have begun a compensation review for maintenance and facilities. Real changes, not a report. Someone near the front raised a hand. A man from the maintenance bay, stocky, practical-faced, the look of someone who had made a decision about whether to speak and decided. Victoria nodded at him. 14 months ago, he said. His voice was level but not quiet. He wanted it heard. I flagged a vibration anomaly in the main rotor drive system. 14 months. I put it in 3 separate maintenance reports. Nothing came back. The room was completely silent. Victoria looked at him. "What's your name?" she said. "Travis." She held his gaze. "I didn't see those reports, which is exactly the problem I'm describing. I'm sorry." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Once, the nod of a man setting something down, another hand. A woman from systems integration, someone Daniel recognized from the late evenings when she was often still at her workstation at 7 p.m. "I've had 3 engineers come the last month," she said. With technical concerns they were afraid to put in writing, because they thought putting it in writing would make them targets. "That ends now," Victoria said. "If anyone comes to you with something they're afraid to put in writing, you tell them to bring it to me directly. My door is open." That's not a phrase, that is an actual fact starting today. She looked at the room once more. "My father used to say that the best measure of a company isn't what it builds. It's how the people who build it feel when they come to work." She paused. "We have not been measuring well. That changes, not in a memo. In what actually happens starting this week." She stepped back up from the front of the room. The applause started near the middle, not thunderous. The kind that builds from genuine response rather than social pressure. It spread. Daniel did not clap, not from disagreement, from the specific restraint of someone who knew that what had just happened was necessary and true, and also the beginning of something, not the thing itself. Words were the beginning. What happened after was the measure. He'd said as much to Nora once, about something smaller, about a classmate who had promised to be nicer. Watch what they do, he'd told her. Not what they say they'll do, what they actually do. He intended to watch. Afterward, people moved through the room the way people do when something real has been said. Finding each other. Travis from maintenance found Garrett, and they talked for several minutes in the corner. The conversation of 2 people who had been carrying similar weights separately, and were realizing they hadn't needed to. Clifford found Daniel near the exit. "She means it," Clifford said. "I think she does. Her father was the same. When Gerald said something, he did it." He looked toward the front of the room where Victoria was still talking with people, actually talking, not managing an exit. "She's more like him than she knows." Daniel looked at Victoria. She was listening to a young engineer from avionics, leaning slightly forward in the way of someone who has decided that listening is the job right now. "Yeah," he said. "I'm starting to see that." The 19 days between the all-hands and the rescheduled dude demonstration had a shape. Early mornings, Daniel, Clifford, Aldrich, and Travis. The 4 of them in the hangar or the conference room or the south corridor, doing the thing that actual repair required. Not managing perception. Not demonstrating productivity. Sitting with the aircraft and the data and asking what was true. Travis's main rotor anomaly turned out to be a microfracture in a coupling housing, identified through acoustic emission testing he'd been running informally for 8 months on his own time. The fracture was small, invisible at standard inspection intervals, located precisely where it would matter most at high-speed load cycles. 40-year-old Travis. 8 months of cut-out private documentation. 2 days to fix once someone had read the documentation. Garrett's pressure regulator took 37 minutes. Clifford was mildly smug about this. The tail rotor brackets were machined to revised spec by a fabrication team that worked through a weekend without being asked to. Because the problem was real and they knew how to fix it. And that, it turned out, was sufficient motivation when you removed the ambient pressure of not being allowed to say the problem was real. Daniel worked alongside them. Not directing. Contributing. There was a difference, and he was careful about it. He had knowledge, and he offered it when it was useful. He asked questions when the answers would help. He deferred to the engineers on their domain, and the technicians on theirs. And he learned, again, that the best teams weren't the ones with the most expertise in the room, but the ones where the expertise that was present could move freely to where it was needed. Aldrich came back on Monday. He walked into the conference room, set his tablet on the table, and said, Daniel told him. All of it. The tail rotor, the hydraulics, the drive shaft coupling, Travis's main rotor finding. Aldrich listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Aldrich looked at the repair documentation for approximately 30 seconds. This is fixable, he said. Yes, all of it. Aldrich nodded. Then let's fix it. That was the entirety of the conversation about what had happened to him, which Daniel respected. Some people needed to process things out loud. Aldrich processed by moving. Victoria was in and out, less present in the hangar than she'd been in the confrontational weeks before, more present in individual conversations. Daniel noticed her stopping to talk with Travis on a Thursday afternoon, not a management check-in, an actual conversation, and Travis was gesturing at the main rotor housing, with the hands of someone explaining something he knew well to someone who was genuinely trying to understand it. He noticed her stopping to talk with Garrett, with the systems integration engineer, with 3 people from the fabrication team whose names he hadn't known before the last 3 weeks. She was doing the work of learning what she'd missed. It was slower work than she wanted it to be. He could see that. The impatience managed rather than absent, but she was doing it. He told Nora about it that evening, in the abbreviated version appropriate for a car ride home from school. She's trying, he said. Do you think she'll keep trying? Nora said. Or just until things are better? I think she's figured out that things don't actually get better if you stop trying. Nora considered this. That's the part most people get wrong. Yeah, he said. It is. The Dodi demonstration team arrived at Halcyon on a Thursday morning in grey November light. 6 people. 3 uniformed, 3 civilian, all with practiced neutrality of professional evaluators who had seen many claims and had learned to wait for evidence before forming opinions. At the front, General Patricia Holloway, 58 years old. Silver hair, the face of someone who had spent 3 decades making consequential decisions in environments that didn't reward second-guessing and had arrived at a state of absolute, unperformed clarity. She walked into Hangar 7 and looked at the Griffin X9 the way Daniel had looked at it 8 months ago. Not admiration. Assessment. Victoria met her at the entrance. They shook hands. The pleasantries were brief because both of them understood that pleasantries were a courtesy and the substance was elsewhere. Daniel stood with Clifford and Travis near the rear observation area, where he'd chosen to be, close enough to see what mattered, far enough to not be in the way. Aldrich was already in his flight gear. He looked across the hangar at Daniel. A nod, the nod of one pilot to another, the specific acknowledgement of shared understanding that didn't need elaboration. Daniel nodded back. Aldrich walked the Griffin X9. The pre-flight took 22 minutes. Daniel watched it with his hands at his sides, and his weight distributed evenly, and the deliberate stillness of someone who has learned to let a process complete without interfering. Aldrich moved around the aircraft with precision and without performance. Checked the tail rotor assembly, the new brackets, the retorqued coupling. Opened the System 3 accesses panel, checked the pressure regulator, closed it. Examined the main rotor housing, checked Travis's repair, which held a small chalk mark from Travis himself. A habit Travis had mentioned and which Daniel had chosen not to comment on. Aldrich climbed in. The turbine wound up. The rotors began to turn. Daniel stopped breathing, not from anxiety, from the cellular response of a person who had spent 9,200 hours with the sound of a turbine and had not, in 3 years away from it, become indifferent to it. The Griffin X9 lifted, smoothly, with the cleanness of a thing that had been argued with for months and had now finally been listened to. It rose to 30 feet, held the hover. Then Aldrich transitioned, and the aircraft moved, fast and responsive and with the authority of a machine that had been fixed properly rather than managed around. The transition from hover to forward flight happened without hesitation. The control response was immediate and continuous. The tail tracked true. Clifford was watching the telemetry on his tablet with the expression of a man seeing numbers confirm what he'd believed for a long time. Travis had his arms crossed and his head tilted slightly in the way of someone listening rather than watching, attenting to what the aircraft sounded like from the outside, which was information a pilot couldn't give you. The demonstration profile ran for 91 minutes. Speed transitions, altitude changes, aggressive directional maneuvers, precision hover at low altitude over a marked target, simulated emergency procedures, recovery from induced instability. The Griffin X9 did not hesitate. When Aldrich brought it in for landing, the touchdown was a whisper. Skids to concrete with so little impact that one of the civilian evaluators, who had been writing steadily in a notebook, stopped writing and just watched. Daniel exhaled. All the way, the length of the breath matching the length of everything that had led to this moment. General Holloway asked for a private meeting with Victoria at 11:34. Daniel was in the secondary conference room with Clifford and the telemetry readouts when his phone buzzed. Victoria's name. A message that said third floor briefing room. Both of you now. Clifford read it over his shoulder. They went up. The briefing room held Holloway, two of her team, Victoria, Aldrich, and now Daniel and Clifford. Holloway looked at Daniel when he came in with the eyes of someone who had also done research. Lieutenant Colonel Mercer, she said. Just Daniel, he said. I've been retired for 3 years. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. I'll tell you what Ms. Ashford for before walked in, she said, because you should hear it directly and not second-hand. She looked at the room. 3 weeks ago, my office received information from a source at Halcyon describing a proposal to proceed with today's demonstration using parameters that did not reflect the full extent of the aircraft's documented technical limitation. The information also described that proposal being rejected. A pause. We knew before this morning what almost happened here. The room was completely still. I want to be precise about why that matters, Holloway said. Not because we reward virtue as an abstract principle, because the Department of Defense has spent 30 years and an amount of money I won't specify purchasing equipment from contractors who managed our expectations. We have buried people in aircraft that were signed off by people who knew things and chose not to tell us. Her voice was level, not emotional. Something harder and more durable than emotional. What happened here was different. A decision was made to delay, to repair, to be honest about the gap between what you had and what you'd promised. That is not what we expect, and it is something I am taking back to Washington as an example of what we should expect. Nobody spoke. The contract is approved, she said. Pending final paperwork which you'll have by end of week. She looked at Clifford. Your engineering instincts saved this program, she said, possibly more than that. Clifford looked at the floor. The instincts were correct. The analysis was done by a team. The person who identified the original failure mode walked in at 6 in the morning and wasn't supposed to know what he was looking at. Holloway looked at Daniel. Yes, she said. I read your file, Mr. Mercer. All of it. She paused. The Air Force has positions in civilian aviation safety consulting. Senior roles. Work that would use everything you know. If you're ever interested, the door is open. Daniel looked at her. He thought about the all-hands meeting. About Travis and Garrett and the systems integration engineer and the 3 people from fabrication. About Nora's drawing with the 2 figures in the cockpit. About the 3rd stair and the cucumber and 11 strokes and the things you keep doing because they're right. I appreciate that, I said, but I'm where I need to be. Holloway studied him. Your daughter, she said. Yes, she nodded, once. With the respect of someone who had made different choices and had understood without judgment that different choices existed. She's lucky, she said. I'm the lucky one, he said. He meant it completely. The surgery was 6 weeks after the demonstration, on a Thursday in mid-January, when the mountains had 3 feet of fresh snow on the upper faces, and Boulder was the particular still that follows a storm. Sylvia took Nora for the first 4 days. Daniel had packed her bag with her rocks, her books, a change of clothes for each day, plus 1 extra for the category of unpredictable, and the small lavender sachet from the bathroom shelf that had been Catherine's and that Nora used to help her sleep. He didn't explain the sachet. Sylvia understood without explanation. Nora hugged him at Sylvia's front door, long, her arms around his waist, her face against his jacket. You're going to be fine, she said. That's my line, he said. I know, I'm borrowing it. She pulled back and looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, the eyes of someone who was feeling several things at once and had decided that holding them was possible. Call me when you wake up. First thing. Don't say first thing and then call me third thing. I won't, promise. I promise, Nora. She held his gaze for another moment, then stepped back. The specific deliberateness of a person who has decided to let go and is doing it. He drove to the airport. Dr. Grayson Wick met him at the pre-op intake with the quiet efficiency of someone who prepared for things properly and then did them. The conversation before anesthesia was brief, information, not reassurance. What would happen and in what order and what to expect when he woke up. Daniel appreciated the absence of false comfort. You've been patient, Wick said, reviewing the chart. I've been hiding, Daniel said. Different thing. Wick looked at him for a moment. Okay, he said, let's go. He woke in stages. Sensation returning before thought, then sound, then the reassembly of where he was and why and what he was doing here. Recovery room, ceiling pale and institutional, Both feet present, both hands. Left leg with sensation in it, not full, not perfect, but present in a way he was noting carefully and not yet interpreting. His phone was on the tray table. He picked it up. Surgery done. I'm feeling okay. Her response, Dad, then. Are you really okay, or are you saying okay then? Tell me the real version, he smiled. The real version is that I'm awake and my leg is there, and it hurts in ways that are probably good signs, and I'm going to call you in about 10 minutes. Response was a long row of small icons that he mostly couldn't identify but understood collectively to mean relief. He put the phone down, looked at the ceiling. Okay, recovery took 9 weeks. The first 4 he spent mostly horizontal, at Sylvia's and then his own house. Clifford came every Thursday with technical documentation he didn't need Daniel's input on yet, but used as cover for sitting in the kitchen and talking about everything except how Daniel was feeling, which was the precise form of friendship Daniel was equipped to receive. Aldrich called from the hangar most weeks, brief calls, pilot to pilot. He'd say something about the Griffin X9's current performance envelope, and Daniel would say something back, and neither of them would mention that what they were really doing was staying in contact. Nora was there every afternoon from 3 o'clock to bedtime. She had established an after-school routine that began with showing him the most important thing from her day before she started homework. It was never the same thing twice. A drawing, a fact she'd learned, a rock from the school parking lot, a sentence she'd written in English class that she thought was good. Those 15 minutes were the architecture of recovery. Everything else organized around them. Week 4, physical therapy. Week 6, 3 miles without stopping. Week 8, driving himself to the grocery store. He bought mustard, stood in the condiment aisle with 2 jars of it, and felt something disproportionate to the occasion. He stood there for a moment and let himself feel it, then put both jars in the cart. Week 9, Dr. Wicks assigned less paperwork, FAA civilian aviation medical standards. With limitations, visual flight rules, pulse maximum 2-hour operations, no instrument-only conditions. He read the paperwork at the kitchen table. Then he called the flight school at the regional airfield 15 minutes from his house and asked about rental availability for a Schweizer 300C. The woman on the phone said they had one available Saturday morning. He said he'd take it. He told Nora that evening. Set the clearance paperwork on the table next to her dinner plate. She read it with the focus she brought to everything important, then looked up. You can fly, she said, limited, but yes, she looked at the paperwork again, then at him. Can I come? That's the plan? Her smile was her mother's, full and unguarded, and pointed directly at him, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to arrive. Okay, she said, just okay. The morning he chose was a Saturday in March, when the sky was the specific blue that Colorado produces as compensation for February, and the mountains had fresh snow on the upper faces that caught the early light, and the drive to the airfield took 14 minutes, because there was no traffic and the roads were dry. Nora wore her purple jacket, both braids intact before they left the house, which she'd done herself, which she'd been doing herself since October, and he was still mildly astonished by every time. She was quiet in the truck, the thinking kind of quiet, not the worried kind. He knew the difference. The Schweizer 300C was on the tarmac when they came around the side of the flight school building. Blue and white, bubble canopy, small and uncomplicated and exactly right. Nora saw it and stopped. He stopped next to her. That's it, he said. It's smaller than I thought. They usually are. Is that okay? It's better. You feel everything in a smaller aircraft. Every input, every response. There's no distance between you and what the machine is doing. She looked at it for a long moment, then walked toward it. He did the pre-flight with her beside him, not lecturing, narrating some of it. The things she'd asked about on Friday evening when she'd produced a list of questions written in blue pen. 3 pages, both sides of the paper. He let her put her hand on the fuselage when they got to the body inspection. She pressed her palm flat against the aluminum and held it there. He didn't ask what she felt. She'd tell him or she wouldn't. They climbed in. He helped her with the 4-point harness, firm but not tight. Headset on, the small version the flight school had for younger students. She looked through the bubble canopy at the airfield, the mountains, the morning. Okay, she said. Through the headset her voice was clear and close, same as if she were a foot away, which she was. He ran through the startup sequence. The turbine wound up. Nora's eyes went wide, not from fear, from the size of it. The sound that starts small and builds until it's the whole room. The rotors turned, slowly at first. Then the blur of it overhead, the silver circle that meant something was about to change. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. No hesitation. He increased collective. The Schweitzer 300C left the tarmac, gently, precisely. The conversation between his hands and the aircraft resumed after 3.5 years, immediate and fluent, as if the gap had been a pause rather than an ending. He'd wondered whether it would feel different, whether the years away would have changed the language. It hadn't changed, he'd changed. But the language was the same. They rose to 400 feet. He banked left and boulders spread out below them in the morning light. The Pearl Street corridor running east-west, the university, the creek, the neighborhoods. Nora was looking at all of it with her face closer to the canopy. Dad, I can see the park, the one with the creek. I see it, and our street, I know. It looks... She stopped, finding the word. He gave her time. It looks like a map that's also real at the same time. That's exactly what it is, he said. He banked right, toward the mountains. The Rockies came up ahead of them, enormous and unhurried. The same as they had been from the ground, except that from here you could see the full shape of them without anything in the way. They're bigger from here, Nora said. Same size, I know, but you can see more of them. From the ground there's always something between you and the whole thing. He looked at her, at his daughter's face against the canopy, describing a thing he'd never found words for in 20 years of flying. Yeah, he said. That's exactly it. They flew for 1 hour and 38 minutes. He showed her what a hover felt like, what a gentle bank felt like from inside it, what the horizon did when you turned slowly and let the world rotate around a fixed point. She asked questions, good ones, the kind that meant she was attending to what was actually happening rather than her idea of what was happening. At one point she said, "Can I try?" He looked at her. "Your hands on the stick," he said. "Light. Don't push. Don't steer. Just feel what it wants to do." She put her hands on the dual control stick. He kept his hands ready. She held it, and felt the thing that couldn't be described before you felt it. The aircraft alive under your hands, not passive, not mechanical. A continuous, responsive presence that told you where it was and what it wanted and what you needed to give it. Her breath went out through the headset. "Oh," she said. "Just that." He smiled and said nothing. Because some things arrived complete and adding words to them was the wrong instinct. He set the aircraft down at 9:51. The touchdown was soft, the kind he'd practiced for years until it was automatic, the rotors and the collective and the pedals all in continuous small conversation with the ground and the air until the skids made contact and you couldn't feel the exact moment it happened. The rotors slowed. The turbine wound down. The quiet after. They sat in the cockpit without speaking, both of them, looking at the mountains through the canopy. "Dad," Nora said. "Yeah, I want to do that again. We can arrange that." She looked at the mountains a lot of times. "A lot of times," he agreed. She turned and looked at him. "Were you happy up there?" she said. He thought about it, the real version. He was happy up there. The conversation with the aircraft after 3 years was still the same conversation, and that was something. But he was happy here too. Right here. On the tarmac with the rotors cooling, his daughter turned to Noor with him asking the question. He was happy in a way that was different from when flying was the whole of his life. When the rank and the hours and the missions were what he was made of. He was happy in the way of someone who had survived losing things and found that what remained, chosen carefully and tended properly, was not a lesser version of happiness. It was just a different shape of it, and different shapes could be complete. "Yes," he said, "I was." "Good." She looked back at the mountains. "Me too." They drove home with the windows down a little because she asked and he said yes. The radio played something he didn't know. She was already humming to it before the first chorus, which meant she'd heard it somewhere, which meant she had a whole musical life he wasn't fully current on, which was correct and appropriate and only mildly vertiginous. He drove. The mountains kept pace. Boulder came up around them, familiar street by familiar street. He knew this route the way he knew his kitchen, by contact and repetition, the yellow lines, the bare cottonwoods along the creek, the school where Nora spent 7 hours a day learning things he found out about in 5-minute increments every afternoon. He pulled into the driveway. They sat for a moment with the engine off and the radio still on low, neither of them in a hurry to end the morning. "Dad," Nora said, "when I'm older, can you teach me for real?" He looked at her. If that's what you want, I want to try it first and then decide. She looked at the house, but I think I'll want to. Then yes, he said. I'll teach you. She got out of the truck. He got out of the truck. She went ahead to the door and waited while he found his keys, and he stepped over the third stair when they went in, automatic, and she stepped over it too. Same as she'd been doing since she was 6, and the house was warm and quiet and full of the things they'd accumulated together over 5 years of making it theirs. He needed eggs, and the cereal in the blue box whose name he never remembered, and more of those crackers. He'd go this afternoon. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, just stood there. In the kitchen that was 8 steps from the bedroom and had a cold spot on the tile near the refrigerator and a cabinet that stuck in wet weather. He knew this kitchen. He knew this house. He knew the stair and the route to school and the right amount of tension for Nora's braids and the precise way 11 strokes made the batter correct and why the cucumber went in the lunchbox, even when he already knew she'd eat around it. He knew where things were, all the things. And standing there in the kitchens on a Saturday morning in March, with the mountains where they always were, and his daughter down the hall talking to her rocks as she put them back on the windowsill, he felt something that had been missing for a long time, and had now returned not with fanfare but quietly, the way things were to turn when you've stopped looking for them. He was home, not arriving, not returning, simply here, present. In possession of himself and his life and the ordinary extraordinary fact of a day that had already held a flight and would still fold grocery shopping and homework and the third stair and dinner and the song he'd sing at bedtime that Catherine had sung and that he'd learned after she was gone. Late as usual. But here, that was the whole of it. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.